Jeff Marek of The
Hey.
Sheet. It debuted on Monday. He joins us from his new studio. How you doing, fella? Congratulations.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Blake. No merch. They don't give me much promotion around here.
My God, I think I've got merch.
I do like the S&P hats. Like, put me down for one of those.
We got one for you.
Those are sharp, man. Those look good. Yes, thank you very much. How's it go? Pretty quiet Friday, hey, boys.
The week has been crazy here. I don't know if you've been keeping track of Canucks land. It's been a newsy week.
He has, because he's done some digging on Nils Höglander. What do you know there, Mr. Marek?
Well, I mean, listen. I think Elliot put out the report that the Pittsburgh Penguins are interested, which does fit, sort of the MO of how Kyle Dubas is trying to do not a tear down rebuild, but a rebuild on the fly. Like the one thing about Dubas, and you look historically, even going back to when he ran the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds of the OHL, Dubas is a big second chance guy, and hiring Sheldon Keefe in Sault Ste. Marie was very much a second chance move. And it seems as if the way that they're trying to do this in Pittsburgh, and I keep trying to repeat to people, no, this is the rebuild. This is just not a tear it down all the way to the nuts and bolts rebuild. Discuss amongst yourselves whether you think that can ever work, or the more salient way to do it is to strip it all down. But he's looking for players in their mid-20s, and you see Cody Glass, and you see Philip Tomasino. He's looking for guys that need the change of scenery, and hoping that he can hit on a couple here as he tries to redevelop the Pittsburgh Penguins. So it shouldn't necessarily be a surprise that Nils Höglander's name gets attached to the Pittsburgh Penguins. I did talk to one team today about Höglander who had, kick tires is probably the best way to put it. And this person said to me that the one thing that gave them much cause for pause was quite simply the contract. And the new deal hasn't even kicked in yet. And the contract was made back, this was made in October, coming off a shooting percentage pretty close to 1 million. And now he's not shooting 1 million anymore. And the one thing that gave, this group a lot of reason for pause here was the 3x3, which starts next season for Höglander.
Which in a couple of years' time, Jeff, I mean, with the inflationary effect here of the cap eventually going, I mean, I would think $3 million looks pretty good. Ages pretty well. Like we've been seeing this for the last 12 months here. We've got to readjust what numbers mean under the cap here, with this cap going up every year now.
I do understand that, but there is still, like, are you of the belief that, because I am, that you never make mistakes necessarily when you overpay the big boys on your team, but you get in trouble the further down the lineup you go? Yeah. Like I do understand that, and I understand your point, and it's the correct one. All of us don't necessarily look at the number, look at the salary cap percentage.
Yeah.
I understand that, and players love to hear that one, and general managers don't, because they like to have their artificial ceilings based on players that signed contracts 3 years ago, and no one's going higher than Nathan McKinnon, et cetera, et cetera. Well, just look at percentages. Don't look at the actual number. But I think, and I'm just drawing one example from one team. That it was the contract that scared them away more than anything else.
Marcus Pettersson is firmly on the block in Pittsburgh. Yeah. Höglander for Pettersson, is that a fair deal? Who says no on that one?
Listen, there's a $1 million difference in salary. Of course, there's difference in term there. It's not as if, look, just to be blunt, it's not as if the Vancouver Canucks haven't had interest in Marcus Pettersson before. I mean, going back a few years when it was Ron Hextall as a general manager, there were some conversations and discussions that revolved around Marcus Pettersson, one of those players that both Rutherford and Alvin liked, and we suspect still like as well. So I think maybe if this one happens, we can sort of chalk this one up to maybe one of the worst kept secrets around the NHL, the Vancouver Canucks and Jim Rutherford's attraction to Marcus Pettersson. Look, like, Marcus Pettersson's on an expiring deal. Marcus Pettersson is a very safe, reliable defenseman who can be a little bit snarly at times, can make a real good first pass, can move the puck out of your zone. And for any team that wants to do anything in the playoffs, as you guys well know, you can never have enough defensemen that can move the puck. Like, this one makes sense to me about 1,000,000%. But I've been saying that about Pettersson now for 2 going on maybe 3 years.
It's a weird trade market right now in that there seems to be more chatter, But are we anywhere closer to actual consummation of deals here?
It's a great question. So in one sense, you know what kind of complicates everything here? The Four Nations tournament. The Four Nations tournament kind of, for some teams, and I know one team specifically that doesn't want to make a big move until the Four Nations tournament is done and their players come back healthy. I mean, we can have the 2006 Dominic Hasek conversation about the Ottawa Senators and what happened there, and how I think we can all remember, the Ottawa Senators essentially just even begging Hasek just to try to go on the ice to see how he can play. And you can make the argument, I think rightfully so, that probably cost the Ottawa Senators a cup. And that's why the Ottawa Senators of that season, 2006, will go down as one of the best teams to never win the Stanley Cup. They were that good. I think complicating things a little bit might be the Four Nations, because you don't want to make too big a deal, completely restructure your team, and then bam, a key player is out of the lineup for the remainder of the season. Like, I think one of the nightmares that the Winnipeg Jets are probably looking at here is, the thought, like, hey, it's great, our guy's in net for Team USA. That's awesome. He's got the respect of the NHL world. This is tremendous. Internationally, he's being recognized. If Connor Hellebuck gets hurt, what an absolute disaster for the Winnipeg Jets. Or if you're a team like the Dallas Stars. So Dallas is going to go big game hunting this year. Like, this is going to be a very much an all-in season for the Dallas Stars. But should the Dallas Stars make any major, team-changing moves before they know that Jake Ottinger's through the Four Nations unscathed? Maybe I'm putting too much into this, but I've had more than a couple of people mention this to me in the past couple of days, that I do think that it is at least one of the concerns that's out there right now.
Well, there's two facets to that. You go to the Four Nations and a key member of your team gets injured, and that sewers your chances, like your goalie going down. Or you trade for a guy now, that guy is in the Four Nations and he gets injured, and you've given up a ton of assets to get that guy, and you don't even have that player. So there's a couple different ways where that could really sewer you. So
we never really considered this before. We just like, Four Nations, this is awesome. Replace All-Star, competitive games, this is going to be great. Whereas managers are saying, it's good as long as my guys come back healthy. You're 100% right about
the lesson is you trade for a Russian, a Czech guy, or Andrzej Kopitar. Because they're not going to be playing.
German, go for it. Anyone? You're good to go. Trade for those guys. Are going to be in Cabo for the week and a half.
Mm-hmm. And just so people, Dominic Hasek was 28-10-4 with a 209 goals against and a 925 save percentage for the best team in the NHL.
Yeah,
when his groin went pop at the Torino Olympics. I was telling you,
it was like 5 minutes into him being on the ice too, wasn't it, Matt? Like you were in Ottawa then, right? I
was in the Ottawa Citizen newsroom. The game was on every television, and the groan that shot through that place when the groin went. It was quite a turn for the worse. The Canucks having life without JT Miller, Thatcher Demko, and Philip Hronek here. Jeff, what have you made of them? Minus these three big stars, and the winning continues.
Listen. First of all, Kevin Lankinen, bravo. And listen, I'm gonna butcher a quote here, which I believe was turn of the century, the Bertrand Russell, British philosopher, where he said something along the lines of, "You can legitimately ask a man to walk on a tightrope for 20 minutes, but you can't expect him to walk on a tightrope for 20 years." You can expect the team to do well short term with some adversity and some injuries and walk that tightrope for a little while. You just can't expect teams to excel when the injuries are longer than essentially 20 minutes. Anyway, we all have our fingers crossed for JT Miller and hope that he's fine and comes back healthy. And a healthy JT Miller is one of the best players in the league, full stop. And the good news looks better and better every day about Thatcher Demko. Now I'm using about being able to back up, and that's great. Hronek is such a rock on the blue line for the Vancouver Canucks. I'm telling you this when you're there to document every practice at every game. Again, you can do it short term. I just don't like the idea of doing it long term, but so far, given that expectations would need to be lowered when these players are out of the lineup, I think Vancouver's played well. I really do.
And
Helps that Hughes is amazing, by the way. Helps that Hughes is like on a completely different planet right now.
Well, I don't know if you noticed too, back-to-back days with him away from the practice sheet, and Rick Tocchet saying that it was his idea to chase him away yesterday. Leads you to believe that this has been a burden here on Quinn Hughes keeping this team afloat.
But that's it, right? Like that's what superstar players do, and this is just a sort of another sort of feather in the cap of Quinn Hughes. Look, I know when I start talking about Quinn Hughes, I'm like, one sentence away from saying he invented oxygen. But like honestly, like what more can? I think a couple of times ago when we were speaking, we started talking about how all of a sudden now he's a shooting threat as well. Like he just keeps getting more and more bullets in the chamber for himself here. It's turning in another command performance. I mean, is it heavy lifting? Yeah, it's heavy lifting, but so far so good for Quinn Hughes.
Well, for us, it's more evidence of a Hart candidacy that seems to be nowhere past the BC border here at this point. But
just give it time. Just give it time. That's all. Just like honestly, like we're not at Christmas yet. Just give it time. Like seriously, like people will pay attention. People are watching.
Especially with these injuries, absolutely. This is the kind of stuff where which brings up Kirill Kaprizov, who we just saw. Mm-hmm. Great season. Yep. Can a winger legitimately win the Hart in your mind?
The winger question for trophies has always been Selke for me, and I think for a lot of people, Yuri Lettinen being the last to win the Selke. But why not? Mm-hmm. I know that wingers kind of get knocked because they don't have the same defensive responsibilities that a center does. So right away you're getting the short end of the stick. But even just swinging it over to the Selke for 1 second, like I think one of the crimes of the last generation as far as trophies go was that a player like Marian Hossa never won the Selke. Or even if you want to swing it to the middle, like Mikko Koivu, I'll throw his name out there too. I think a winger can. I think it's harder for a winger to win the Hart Trophy unless your name is Ovechkin and you're snapping in 60 goals. But I think it all sort of, put it this way, you have to do more than a center would to get that attention. But if anyone's done that, it's Kirill Kaprizov. Now, I still don't know, and I know here we are December 6th having this conversation. I still don't know how long Minnesota can do this. Like, if they can do this, this is one of the great, if they can win the Central, okay? If they can win the Central, this is one of the great achievements that we've seen in the past few years, because I don't know many teams that could tie a skate behind their back with a $14 million cap hole deliberately, because everything
they've been competitive throughout. They've been competitive from the moment they bought those guys out. They've remained relatively competitive. It's crazy.
It's crazy. It's also been awful because it's got them in that mushy middle part.
Yeah.
Right. Like what's the old Sam Kinison line? If you're gonna miss heaven, don't miss it by 2 inches. Like if you're gonna miss, really miss, because there's a reward for making heaven, and there's a reward for being a totally opposite and farthest away from heaven. You can either get a first roll draft pick or you can win a Stanley Cup. Being anywhere in the middle is tough for you. But I'm with you. Like, good on them. Good on what Bill Guerin's been able to put together here. I just don't know how long Minnie can do this without any reinforcements and without any new bodies. It's, to me, this is one of the great stories in the NHL. No one really saw this one coming. I don't think anyone said Minnie. No. I don't think Minnie said, look, Minnesota
Winnipeg
for
or
the playoffs, let alone top of the division.
Some of us were bullish on their playoff chances, but yes, top of the division is another thing. I'm not a spiritual man, but I have a feeling that Sam took the elevator going south.
I think it was probably right there.
Kucherov in 2019, the last winger to win the Hart Trophy. It's been 5 centermen since. In fact, it was Kucherov, Hall, and Kane. 3 of 4 years a winger won the Hart Trophy, and then I
think Pasta could do it too. Like he drives play from the wing too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just more difficult to get the attention. That's all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I got to say, Four Nations appetite seems a little muted here in Vancouver for this tournament. No Canucks on Team Canada. Besser and Demko now not going to play on Team USA. I think Canucks fans want their players rested for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Yeah. But it also may be that we're an Olympic city that saw one of the great hockey games ever played for an Olympic gold medal, right? So I think there's a lot of factors working into it. What's your sense of enthusiasm around the league, around the country for Four Nations?
So you're telling me that Vancouver Canucks fans, or any hockey fans for that matter, if this ends up being Canada and USA, that there's not going to be an excitement in every single hockey market for this?
I think there will be excitement.
For that.
I don't think you're going to have people pouring into and pouring out of bars like we saw for the gold medal game in
No chance.
2002 or 2010 or even
no way.
Sochi was at a very odd hour here.
Like Canada, Finland, does that catch your attention en route to the game you're talking about? I don't know that it does.
How am I a bad person if I'm rooting for a Sweden-Finland final?
Yes,
we're all
you
just
are.
assuming
You're a
it's going to
bad
be
Canadian.
Canada,
You can
USA.
hand in your passport at the nearest Customs and Borders office, sir.
Hang on. So I was talking to Rhett Warner about this yesterday. How about your thoughts on this one? I always think about 1996 when I see Canada USA playing, because those three games in the final were fantastic. Canada wins in Philly, and then USA wins 2 games in Montreal. That third game where they punched, like, was it 4 goals in 3 minutes to win, was just. And then Dave Stubbs in the Gazette had the great headline, "Whoa, Canada." And we saw fights in those games. Like, we saw Guerin, Primo, Tkachuk, Lemieux, like, gloves down, gloves off, stick down. They challenged the Chiefs. Do you think it's beyond the pale to think of Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk, even though they're on the same team, going for it in this one? You know what happens when these guys pull the sweater over their shoulders.
I would put nothing past either Tkachuk brother.
Yeah.
But I would be surprised if you see fights and nastiness.
For an Olympic medal,
games.
the answer is yes. For this,
Well, except in the Olympics, you fight. It's hard. It's
a little. See, I could see it more in this
penalty.
one, where it's still a big tournament. The emotions are high, but I mean, you know what happens when you fight in the Olympics and that stage and that medal, etc. I don't know. I could see it. I really could. Much to the chagrin of Florida Panthers fans, I suppose.
Yeah. Hey,
but that's one that, for whatever reason, I just wonder about.
We were talking about the Canada roster, and a cynic would say they have not learned the Rob Zamner lesson here in terms of who they brought. A tactician might say, no, they brought some defensive-minded players like Bennett, like Sanheim, like Colton Parayko, because they see the firepower on the other side, and they also see their own crease.
Yep.
And are looking to patch the vulnerability as best as possible.
Just as an aside, before I get to that, am I the only one that feels bad for Rob Zamner?
I feel bad for him too, and I feel bad every time I bring him up.
Nothing
Jeff,
that he's done, because I've done it too, Matt. Like, I've done it too. On Rob Zamner, like, I've done it.
He
but
was
it's like he's
such
held up
an
as like
outlier. Like,
I know.
You know, like
how come? Okay,
Shane Corson.
Let me give you another one.
Zamner never had more than 50 points in a season. He never had more than 19 goals in a season.
But the thing is, like, if you look historically, like 1987 was, for a lot of people, myself included, the best hockey we ever saw. Like that Canada Cup. If Canada would have lost that game at Copps Coliseum, the 6-5 game with the Howard Chuck hook and Gretzky to Lemieux and all that, and Larry Murphy, the great decoy, where he's never getting the puck, but he's the greatest decoy of all time. Larry Murphy's going to that post, but no one thinks he's getting that puck from Lemieux. Do you remember that? Remember anyone ever have a conversation about Normand Rochefort? When's the last time either of you guys had a conversation about Normand Rochefort?
I'm not sure I've had a single
Normand
conversation.
Rochefort was on that team.
Was he really?
Normand Rochefort was on that team. Was it a Serge Savard pick? Who knows? Maybe, you know how the politics of all these things play out. But again, it's only an issue if you lose. Mm-hmm. Right? It's
Rochefort
only
was a defensive. Yeah. So
yeah.
I'll say
see, no one's ever mentioned Normand Rochefort. Where did he come from?
Yeah. But like Dan Hamhuis was on the Sochi team. Like, we know Dan, we love Dan. Dan was never going to put up points. Dan was a hell of a defenseman.
Yeah.
So I can abide that. It's when you go up front and take a purely defensive player or a mostly defensive player. And first of all, before we get any further, let me correct you, Mr. Marek. Blake is from Winnipeg, so there was no Howard Chuck hook.
Yeah, I was going to
take the damn face-off, okay, Marek?
Clean.
If he doesn't win that draw,
okay. One of the great, because Howard Chuck's one of my favorite players. And that's why I love Cole Perfetti, because he was the Howard Chuck pick for Winnipeg. His mom making the pick, I always have an emotional attachment because I knew the family and I got to know Dale pretty well when he coached Barrie. But when you look at that moment for that draw, I've always put myself in Dale Howard Chuck's place there, because do you remember who Mike Keenan pulled out of the faceoff circle to put Dale Howard Chuck in?
Who
was it? Talking?
Mark Messier.
Oh, wow.
So you're Dale Howardchuk and you're skating to the dot saying, yeah, I'm taking the face off, Moose. Coach, what was that? I never got a chance to ask Dale that one, but what was like that moment like when he skated to the face and had to pull Mark Messier out of the dot?
Well, and the idea that Gretzky and Lemieux were just like, no, you take it. Right. That in and of itself, let alone that you're coming on for Messier.
Trust me. In 1987 in Winnipeg, that was a pretty prideful moment. The fact that he was on that team, the fact that he was playing with those guys. I had that poster up pretty damn quick in my bedroom.
Do you have a comment on the hook, Mr. Price?
Yeah.
What hook?
No hook?
There is no hook.
No hook.
What hook? But marvelous stuff. Congrats on your first week. Welcome to the family. We're delighted to have you aboard and look forward to all these Friday conversations going forward.
S&P hat. Let's go, boys.